Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Samuel Adams Returns. Those Anti-Federalists absolutely got it correct. This is Tom Novolis, your host, and I am absolutely delighted today to have a dear friend of mine, Robert Gargasz, Esquire. So that gives you a hint about his background to some degree. He's a constitutionalist, he's an attorney. He has taken and fought hard for our liberties, especially as I've gotten to know him through the COVID insanity, representing small businesses as well as collaborating with other attorneys fighting at the national level in regards to our liberties, our rights. And, Robert's one of the best guys you can have on his team. And today, I have him here because he brought to my attention about 2 weeks ago something that he has filed in a federal lawsuit on an Anti-Money Laundering Improvement Act. And as I researched this act and I read through his lawsuit initially, I'm sitting here going, how in the world did we get to this? Now, we know the answers to a lot of that, but Robert, why don't you give us a little bit more on what you've been up to and when did you recognize that this was an affront to not just your liberties, but and has to be emphasized, people, this is every business, every small entity in the United States is now subject to great penalty. Individuals, where you thought you were protected, you no longer are. And with that, Robert, take it over.
Thank you, Tom. And I would just want to tell everybody what an absolute treasure Tom is. He's taught me constitutional law. He's come out in Lorain County and other counties to teach the Constitution, Ohio Constitution, the federal Constitution, and history. And I have to say that his acumen is far above mine. But Tom, you're right. You're absolutely right. This law, the law itself admits to over 32 million United States businesses are going to be affected, or are being affected as we sit here today, right now. And when I say affected, some people say, well, how's that going to bother me? Well, I learned it because I was reading, and it says, what's this Corporate Transparency Act, the final rule? And I've been reading this coming up for about 6 months before it, May, June, July of last year. And I'm saying to myself, well, wait a second. I says, I've been practicing law for 40 years, okay, in Lorain, Ohio, northern Ohio. And every corporation, every limited liability company, every business partnership, every business trust, every joint venture, any kind of transactions, trusts, associations for profit. So, you're all now under this umbrella of demand from the federal government.
Bob, with that, isn't nonprofits, not-for-profit entities are also included in that?
Well, I think, yeah, I know yours is, Tom, because you don't go with the 50c3, nonsense. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, you're right. If you're not specifically exempted, okay, then you're obligated to comply. Well, what happens if you don't comply? Well, if you don't comply, Uncle Sam, and God knows he has all kinds of prosecutors, ones that believe in the oath of Constitution and ones that don't. And so what we have a situation where the government is going to come after you for penalties, criminal penalties of up to 2 years in prison, okay, and a $10,000 fine. Okay, yep. That's just the criminal penalties.
Yeah.
Then they're going to want a civil penalty of $500 a day, $15,000 a month, basically until you run out of money. And they're going to go back and they're going to calculate, when did you fail to file? Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, if you create a company right now, you've got, I believe it's 30 days. You have to file something extra, okay, with the federal government. and you have to give away all your secrets, everything that you once held, close, your estate plan, your stock certificates, whether they were bearer certificates, those have all been made illegal now. Demand certificates, you can't have that. Okay. Well,
But let's
how does
bring
this hurt the individual?
let's take that into really a very interesting, because you keep using you, and I don't know that the listeners at this point understand that the you means the individuals, because as we know that corporations are supposed to be their own entities that then, by virtue of the structure, even with partnerships, limited liability companies, the word liability is to preserve the individual within the context of what that business entity, and keep that wall of separation and maintain some level of what you're saying is coming against is the privacies in that. So what you're telling us is then that veil of privacy, as well as the veil of protection, is now pierced, and that no longer exists within the context of corporate law in general.
Well, not only that, Tom, you're absolutely correct. Your limited liability companies, all of your sheltering, your force field's been turned off. And the Klingons are coming right now, and we got no way to stop the photon torpedoes. They're coming for us. The government, the federal government, has got us in their sights. And you, as a corporate president, corporate treasurer, corporate secretary, manager, vice president, you're all personally exposed to this, because somebody in the government is going to say you had a responsibility to comply and you didn't. So now you have criminal liabilities and you have civil liabilities personally. Okay, in addition to the corporate liabilities. And the same thing with the limited liabilities companies. Your membership share is exposed. The value of your membership share. You as the president, you as the operating manager, you as the general partner, you as anybody that's in charge of those entities are now in the gun sights. You're being lined up to be stricken with this criminal and civil liability. And we as Americans, okay, should be very upset about this.
Oh,
Now,
absolutely.
I'm not, yeah, I'm
Yeah,
not. Go ahead, Tom.
yeah, no, I wanted to say, as we take and we carry through on some of the, exactly, and where you want to go with this, is that the history of this. Now, you just gave everybody, a giant, more than a bathtub full of ice cold water, and they should be waking up as to what you're saying is going on. And the way the law actually started back in 2020. And from the historical perspective of what I was able to read, the legislation was actually, that portions of it, it was initially vetoed because it was a component of the NDAA, and Trump actually vetoed it initially, but the Democrat Congress went ahead and with the Democrat Senate were able to override to implement the NDAA at that time. And then when the Biden administration came in, as I followed the history of this, and it'll be, all the documentation is there at the website, samueladamsreturns.net, is that they, again, this is embedded, and its sourcing actually comes all the way from the Patriot Act. And so everything that Bob is talking about, I'm sorry, my friendly name for you, Robert.
That's okay. Bob is fine.
Yeah, is that, everything that you're talking about, it generates all the way back from Georgie Bush and what happened under the Patriot Act. And now it's taken, and every time, we know the Patriot Act was always after the private citizen under the guise of terrorism, under the acts of all of this insanities that are supposed to be happening within the general population, and gives law enforcement all this extra power and so on and so forth. They couldn't execute all of that until they had that level of control that we saw within that purely Democrat, Democrat House and Senate. And they trashed on Trump when he was exposing all of this. But then when they got O'Biden in, boy, they just hammered that puppy straight in. And now, historically, folks, you have to understand that this is something that completes the circle from those days of the Patriot Act. And so with that, go ahead, Robert.
I was going to say, Tom, that Patriot Act, I remember speaking with a banker friend of mine who was the president of a local financial institution here. He said, you know, Bob, before that Patriot Act came in, if we received a subpoena, we would tell the customer that, hey, we've got this subpoena. You've got a couple of days to file some kind of a motion to quash. Otherwise, we're going to comply with it. He told me after the Patriot Act, they did away with all of that, and
Yep.
they actually made it a crime for the banker to even notify the customer that there was a request for information in front of them. And if the banker told us, then he would be committing a crime, and he would be subject to all kinds of untold penalties and burdens. And so, yeah, I mean, it's been going on since, shortly after Building 7 fell, okay, in its own footprint.
Yep.
And we have to sit back and ask ourselves, okay, under what constitutional basis, was the federal government ever permitted to begin to collect information on us, American citizens? And I'd like the audience to appreciate this. I am not against fighting criminal terrorism financing. I am not against money laundering being prevented, okay? But I want the audience to understand that the United States of America is like a house.
Yeah.
And the house has 50 rooms in it, and each of those rooms is a state. And as long as Bob Gargasz and his clients stay within the house, we go back and forth in the rooms, we transact business in the rooms. The federal government has never been given the authority that it now claims to have and to require us to provide to it, or jail us, or fine us, or steal and theft our wealth. Okay. Right. And that's what's happening with this bill. And that's why I am so vehemently against it, that I thought to myself, well, these big law firms, somebody's going to stand up for the Constitution. We're going to have an attorney general or two nationwide. Somebody's going to stop this atrocity. And what I come to realize was, come October, come November, I'm not hearing anything except law firms saying, hey, give me $500 or come to my seminar and I'll tell you how to comply with this. Okay, well, if you want to roll over like a puppy dog and have your belly rubbed, okay, that's not me. Okay, you stay the heck away from my office. I don't want you anywhere near me. And it's like, well, what do these people see in cooperation with the government?
Yeah.
Okay, they see the loss of your freedoms. They see the loss of your liberties. And you, sir, audience, ladies, you're going to become slaves, and you're going to have to collect this mark of the beast, okay, this FinCEN number, because if you don't have it, you're not going to be able to go to a bank and get a loan. You're not going to be able to transact business. This is the very inception, the beginning of their destruction of our ability as Americans to conduct business as our families previous, the forefathers, the generations, the greatest generation, they all died. They laid their lives and blood on the sands and in the fields and in the mountains so that we have the right to be an American businessman, a businesswoman. And what do we have today?
Yeah. We have the tyranny. Yeah. So Bob, we're down to the last few seconds here. And so, on that note and those thoughts is that, there's a large small business community and organization that is always lobbying their for small businesses that I've been a part of, and they have not even mentioned anything. So I'm really going to address them with that. And Sam Adams, he was definitely, as I close out, he was definitely understanding of what our liberties meant and how we need to address them. So come on back for the next segment, folks. We'll see you soon. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the second segment of Samuel Adams Returns, and with my guest, Robert Gargasz, Esquire. It's such a delight to have him, and just the wealth of information that he's bringing to us in relationship to this legislation that is devastating to every individual. In our pre-show discussion, and I just want to bring this out real quick, and we're not going to belabor it, is that the real travesty in the fact that this goes down to individuals in businesses, the question comes to, especially for folks in Ohio and some of the other eastern states and a few in the Midwest, what's going to happen to the Amish? Uh, you want to address that real quick before we jump back into some of our other key points, but I think it's clear that we get this word out to the Amish as well.
Thank you, Tom, and God bless the Amish lifestyle, the lifestyle that we all may have to use someday. You know, I always want to protect the Amish people because I might have to engage in animal husbandry. I may have to grow gardens in my front yard and on the tree lawn. I want to have that as an option. But how is the Amish person supposed to comply with all of these criminal impositions when they don't use electricity and they don't use computers? And in fact, there's an aspect of this law that, I articulate that the Constitution's been violated, the Bill of Rights has been violated, but there's also this thing called the Paperwork Reduction Act that Congress passed, and you have to have control numbers in order for each of your regulations that you mandate and your forms that you use to collect information from the United States citizens and its population. And this act doesn't comply with any of them. And they're trying to mix it around by saying, well, we're going to have an electronic portal that everybody's going to have to use. We're not really going to use forms. We're going to make you comply electronically. Well, ladies and gentlemen, tyranny must be resisted, okay? And you are obligated to resist. This is your Christian duty. This is your duty as an American who cares about liberty and freedom. And we need the pulpit, the black collar brigade to stand up and preach to everyone that you have an obligation to resist this.
Yeah. So with that, Bob, let me just ask, because in your federal filing, and one of the comments that you and I've had also, and ladies and gentlemen, clearly understand that, Robert's taken this on and he has filed a federal lawsuit, about 2 weeks ago, I believe, something like that. And, we want to get the word out about that. So be clear, there's two things in this. It's not just the information that you're receiving in this interview, but also with the fact that he needs to get this word out nationally to everyone that you can possibly get it out to. And his contact information's in the newsletter, so you can get a hold of him to get a copy of the filing, because I think it should come from you. And also, I'll make an appeal that I don't know how he's going to set this up, but I'll make an appeal that, donate to him, send him some money to help finance this thing, because doing federal lawsuits, folks, is not a cheap venture. He's done a number of them before, so he knows what that's all about. And that I want to appeal to, and I'll appeal later on as well. But in the body of the lawsuit, I know that there's the 9th and 10th Amendment you clearly address. You clearly address, as you said, the Paperwork Reduction Act. And I think that you also, I don't know that you clearly address or is inferred about our 4th Amendment. So can you give us a quick look at where the primary violations are from the lawsuit's perspective, and how you're looking at taking that through the court system for all of us.
Sure, Tom. You know, when I look at this statute and its penalties that are enumerated and put against the individuals, you know, we do talk about the Fourth Amendment explicitly affirms the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures. And the Fifth Amendment does not require us to speak against ourselves. Well, this statute requires us to disclose all of the information that, you know, is very personal, very private, and most definitely, you know, would have been under the umbrella, you know, penumbra of privacy that is protected. And we have cases from the United States Supreme Court that talks about, you know, that we should have our Fourth Amendment rights and our Fifth Amendment. Boyd versus the United States is one of them. It is a protection against all government invasions of the sanctity of a man's home and the privacies of his life. And we also have Mapp versus Terry that basically creates a right of privacy no less important than all the other rights. And one of the things that I might have failed to mention is that if you don't comply with this and they punish you, they come after you and you lose, you know, and there's a criminal conviction, a felony conviction. This isn't a misdemeanor, this is a felony. Okay, you lose that. Well, guess what? They're going to take your gun. They're going to say you don't have rights under the Second Amendment now either, pal, because you're a felon. Okay, and then they're going to take my license off the wall. You see them over here, right? They're going to take my licenses. They're going to say you can't practice law. You can't be a dentist. You can't be whatever you are. Hell, they may even take my driver's license because I wouldn't even be able to drive truck like I used to when I was a high school kid. Okay, so they're going to take all my licenses, then they're going to steal all my money, and they're going to leave me. I can live under the bridge, like my buddy Tom Renz says. He can always live under the bridge abutment somewhere. Well, that's true, you know, and God help us all, okay, when they come, you know, trying to take these things away from us.
You know, that let me just interject real quick, because, you know, when you said, I was surprised you said the driver's license, because that is one of the pieces of documentation that you have to supply to show that you are the person that you're claiming to be in the filing. So that, boy, you nailed that one so tight that they could even, you know, extract that from you and you have nothing at that time. Well, you know, then you could claim to be an illegal and you get everything back.
Exactly. I'll go to Mexico and walk across the border and call myself Garvier or something. I'll come up with a big name. Or maybe they'll put me in New York and they'll throw the kids out of school so I can have a place to sleep, you know?
Right.
I mean, yeah. You know, and I know that your listeners, your audience, we should relish the fact that this afternoon, DeWine's veto was overridden. Praise God.
Amen.
Okay? Praise God. And that's the other thing I want. I want our audience to understand. Don't have hope. Don't fear this. You know, our standing up, our resistance to this tyranny is obedience to God. Okay, and I'm a Christian man. I'm a sinner, but I believe that I walk with God. Okay, and God's going to protect us. He's not going to allow our businesses to be stolen from us by some tyrant. And when we stand up together and lock arms and tell the government, ain't happening. You're going to have to repeal this. They're going to be just like the people down in the General Assembly of Ohio. Wow. Throw that tyrant the hell out. He's a lame duck. Okay. And Tom and I know you know I worked on trying to get DeWine removed. Okay.
Yes.
Because he locked us down. He put poison in our family's arms, our children's arms, you know, and you know, he's caused a lot of illness and sickness and problems for business in Ohio.
Right.
And I'm not going to allow it to happen as far as my clients and my concerns go. And I hope the audience, and I don't want the audience to fall asleep and think, well, Gargasz is going to save the day. No. I am not Superman, but I am willing to fight. But I need you to get on the horn to your federal Congress, to your federal senators, to everybody, and I need them to repeal this nonsense, at least to domestic transactions, domestic businesses, because the federal government, they have every jurisdiction in the world outside that house. You know,
Right.
the United States of America.
Yeah.
If somebody's coming in as an alien, they have jurisdiction. If I'm taking money overseas or bringing it in from overseas, they have jurisdiction. But they don't have jurisdiction within our 50 rooms under that roof.
So let's stop you right there because we're down to under 5 minutes, Bob. And what I wanted to cover with that, because you segued into it, I'll give you your 50 cents later, but as the straight man. But what we have is that in this legislation and in the final rules is that this is where I laugh and joke, is that a competent court with a request from international law agencies or intelligence agencies can come in and get your private information.
Exactly. Interpol has no business knowing anything about my businesses, about my kids, about my estate plan. And I don't think there's anybody in this audience that thinks that the government should collect all this data, this individual private data, okay, and then make it available to foreign governments, foreign kings, queens, dictates. That's what's going to happen. They got the five, that's all got together and really,
yeah.
Data breaches. They say there's not going to be any data breaches. Give me a break.
Yeah.
You know how many data breaches there are that they don't even tell you about? The government has no way to secure my information. And if it doesn't have a way to secure my information to the degree that I want it secured, then they sure as hell don't have it capable of being secured to your satisfaction and requirements. And I don't trust the government with my data because they've already announced they're going to give it away to the federal governments of, Australia, England. God, look at France. Are you kidding? You're going to give my data to somebody in France?
Well, we have that. We've seen how well that's worked already, just in the domestic components of data being abused within the federal government and DOJ and all of that. And the other side of this is that this goes into the Treasury Department in that new law enforcement entity that they created. So here we go, is that it's automatically tied right into the Treasury Department, and it makes it easy for these, who knows how many they're actually, because they defunded some of these new agents. But this is the complexity of this, ladies and gentlemen. This is the sheer travesty, the despotism, the tyranny, as Bob's trying to make sure you understand, and that we need to take and get on board with Bob, support what he's doing, contact him. His information is in the newsletter, so you're going to have to go there to get that. Bob, give me a minute wrap up on what you want everybody to know, because we're down to that last minute and 50 seconds, and so go for it.
All right. I want your audience to understand that within the documents themselves, the final rule, the regulations, they say that they FinCEN customers are the federal, state, and local and international investigators and regulators. They are going to create intelligence reports to help them build investigations, plan new strategies to combat money laundering. And what that all means is that they're coming after you, and your local municipal tax authority is going to be able to call somebody in the government, and they're going to get all your personal information. And because you're on the outs, because you spoke up against the mayor, you exercised your First Amendment rights to redress your government, they're going to come after you like they were incapable of doing before. All their customers now are going to be coming for the data.
Yeah.
So resist the tyranny. That's what I want you to do. And I want you to support Tom's channel. This man has done yeoman's work to get the Constitution out, not only to people like me, a very good course if you ever get a chance to hear him give a lecture, but also to average citizens who I've enjoyed classes with him on. and young children. I mean, Tom needs your support, and I encourage you to give to Tom specifically for his work.
Bob, I thank you
so much for this opportunity to talk to your audience.
Well, delighted to have you, and we'll keep what the progress report is. Sam Adams fought for liberty. He understood the law. And ladies and gentlemen, please contact Bob to understand more of his work as well. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Samuel Adams Returns. Those Anti-Federalists did get it right. This is Tom Novolis, and this is the third segment for this program. And I highly recommend for all of those in the markets that only get the first and third segment, I highly recommend that you go to samueladamsreturns.net and either listen to the full podcast or watch the full video, because segment number 2 is jam-packed with detail in regards to the legislation and the lawsuit that my good friend Robert Gargasz has filed in the federal courts. I think it's incumbent upon you to be fully aware and understand the tyranny that is all wrapped up within the NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act, to come after you in great detail, your personal property, total violation of the Fourth Amendment. It's just something that you need to hear the rest of with Bob. And once again, I encourage you to go to the website, get his information so that you can take and follow up in 2 areas. One is to get the copy of the lawsuit and share it. Share if you anything that you need to be doing as a business entity is sharing the work that Bob is taking on for you, and support him. Support him with your prayers, support him with your actions, and support him with your money. And if you're an attorney or a legislator, or maybe a whole legislature listening to this, you need to take an act. Your Secretary of State needs to act, as well as your state attorney general needs to take this on to protect every business and not just roll over to the federal government with this. So I wanted to take and walk you through steps in history again. I have to say that what brought me to really looking at just 30, 40, 50 years ago. Let's go back into the 1970s. What brought me to the point of interest in looking back to basically 1776 was a radio broadcast and YouTube video that I saw from a particular group. And through that, I then went and listened to some additional podcasts that they did from a group called The Public Square. It's not the people that are doing the parallel economy. This is some people that actually take and look at what's going on in culture and what's going on in our world, especially from a Christian worldview. And they went back to 1984 on a book by Francis Schaeffer, who impacted me a lot back in the 70s. And the book that they were looking at and did a great book review, and the links are there for you to go look at samueladamsreturns.net, is a book titled The Great Evangelical Disaster. Now, Schaeffer did a great job on taking in, walking through where the evangelicals messed up in 84 and what was it going to look like and what happened in the church. That got me thinking, and I'm going, wait a minute. I read something back in the 70s. And sure enough, and I'll hold the cover up for those that are watching the video, the book is called The Church at the End of the 20th Century. And that's the cover that I have of the version that I have. And this book was written and published, I should say, it was published in 1976. What he had written in this book then was these pretty much younger fellows and gal on the public square. We're talking about in how he encapsulated it all and really wrapped it tight in a smaller version in the great evangelical disaster. Schaeffer outlined, as I've talked before, is not particular to him, but in general, is that there is nothing new under the sun. It's what are you willing to listen to? And as we take and we try to work through what is happening right now from a political perspective and look at what is happening and make sense out of it from a political perspective, Schaeffer's very clear in saying, now you missed it. You missed it for a lot of the different reasons is because the political perspective is corrupted. Science is corrupted. Now, people are beginning to recognize that. And it's very clear. In fact, Schaeffer even spoke of emphatically in what was happening here in the church at the end of the 20th century, the establishment. And he says in this particular book, remember the establishment. He also talks about, in the first and into the beginning of the second chapter, the machine. Now, remember, this is way before the whole idea of the machine and what I utilize a lot of times in the Matrix as a allegory, if you will, to where we are today. But rereading Schaeffer's definitions of where we went from science that had meaning to science that is nonsense. And one comment that he makes very clearly is that you have to think about the scientists. They are not the all-to-be's. These people that show up in in their white trench coats, whatever they are, lab coats, that's it. They're sinful human beings in those lab coats. Well, he takes us through a lot of other aspects of predictions, if you will. Not that he meant to. He was just trying to take and get people to think through what was happening from the 40s, 50s, and becoming alive in the 60s. And in the mid-70s, he brought it all together in a very articulate way. And what he brings into people's view, and few people saw it or even recognize it this very day, is that despotism and totalitarianism that comes from the nothingness and allowing, especially, and I'm only going to focus on a little bit of it, allowing the science of science to be a solution when there's nothing substantial under it. And this is so true within the church as well. If we do not have that clear biblical foundation that I always talk about on the sovereignty of God, then you have no foundation. And he calls it God words. Now, a lot of people can quote God words. We even hear the left quote God words, and many liberal churches quote God words, but they have no substance because they do not understand the Word of God that became flesh. Without understanding that, there's no substance to any of it, not even our political desires, not even to take and look at and fight through what Bob was talking about in the first two segments. If you do not take and go beyond the even the great MAGA movement, that's what one man is taking and bringing to give some coalescence to, but the substance has to go deeper. One of the areas that Schaeffer talks about when we look at both Christianity and we look at conservatism, and this was back in the 70s when he was mentioning this, is that it's only a reminiscence. All it is that gut feeling of what should be. Now, Bob was talking about me teaching constitutional classes, and most people involved in the MAGA movement, most people involved in any of our political movements, in the party system, have zero, or at best, a minuscule understanding of constitutionalism, federalism, republicanism, the total underlying essence of how our government is to operate, what is guaranteed to the states with a Republican constitutional form of government. It's all just a shadow. It's a remembrance of what is supposed to be there. But they don't know. The majority of people, even on this program, that listen to this program, don't really know. So chasing after political solutions, all you're going to get more of is political confusion until you have two basic essences and underlying fundamentals come together for you. The first being the sovereignty of Christ as identified in foundational Reformation teaching. If you don't have that as an underlying mechanism, you'll never understand the foundations of constitutionalism in the United States. I bring that out in my one book, but not to promote the book, but to promote the true concept. In these last 2 minutes, I do want to mention the two elements, two persons that Schaeffer brings out in relationship to the destruction of America and what we're seeing in relationship to our corporatism, if you will, right now. One person was Herbert Marcuse, who was an element. He was part of the Frankfurt School. And so he was one of the people that helped define critical theory back in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. He worked for the Office of Strategic Services when he came over from Germany, which is now the Central Intelligence Agency. So they have been involved in all of stuff from the beginning. And one of the quotes that I want to take, or one of the tags that was put to him, is that he was the father of the New Left. Very instrumental in all of that. And what he wrote and what he did on businesses becoming the entities that need to lead and control. I don't have time to get into more about him because I just don't have time. And the other person I'll just bring together is a Galbraith. And his new industrial state was also where corporations and large firms would be the leaders in America and should be. Ladies and gentlemen, it's time that you really look beyond just the political and look at the deeper meaning of who you are in relationship to the living God and what that means then and how you're going to function to stand up against tyranny. Come on back next week.